Coming live from Seattle, USA is our guest tonight. Welcome to this very special edition of the Kajmasterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have LeCara Jr., registered master certified life coach, a teacher, and a great author. Welcome to the show, Ray.
Hello, AJ. Good evening. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. You are very much welcome. So, Ray, we'll be talking about, how discovering your most authentic self. Before I come to exactly this, let us remember the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And that was, 1886. Today is 2023. And the situation is that there it was just about one person. Looking at the duality of nature, human nature, and in today's time, you talk about being our authentic self. Dr. Jekyll was struggling with the same thing. Here, to meet so many things, meet our security needs, forget about self-actualization and about the duality of human nature, we are getting distant from one another. In this backdrop, how do you look at being our authentic self as something that is achievable?
Well, first off, I think that authenticity is one of those buzzwords that's been sort of abused and thrown around and overused. And a lot of times it has a lot to do with, in my opinion, it's dealt with us dealing with external forces. But I think before we can really begin to look at being authentic in our relationships or in our careers, we need to be authentic with ourselves, which comes down to being able to answer that question of who are you? So you talk about Jekyll and Hyde, like so many people, they are not necessarily comfortable looking at that person in the mirror. And the more comfortable we can be doing that, which comes from peeling back the layers and being able to tap into what our accomplishments are, what your talents are, what your skills are, what you like and what you don't like. That's how you can achieve that. Being able to actually peel back the layers and examine yourself that way, it can be a game changer. But a lot of times we only get a chance to really consider that when we're getting ready for an interview, or when we're filling out a job application or something of that nature, where we're going to be asked, tell me a little bit about yourself, which is really the same thing as, who are you? And so those experiences become these, oh my goodness, I have to prepare for it. I have to prepare for it type of experiences. When, wait a minute, if we were actually more in tune and connected with who we are, and again, looking in that mirror, being able to accept, embrace, and celebrate who that person is, we'd be able to answer a lot of those questions or deal with those situations in a much easier way. So it is achievable, but it's achievable only through examining who you are.
And how do we know who we are? Because it is something, peeling layers after layers after layers. And an individual, his nature, his behavior, this keeps on changing with time, gets refined or gets redefined also
Right.
with time. So
Right.
how do you know, and this is where you are an expert of, Dr. Ray, is that how much do I think in terms of peeling those layers? Because nowadays, as we talked about the duality of human nature, if I peel even a bit, then those issues about imposter syndrome, issues about other form of insecurities, issues about even something which I am not at, I mean, I'm something at home, I'm something in different in office, I'm something
Right.
in front of other people. How would I know till what extent should do I have to reach? It is like, digging a hole in the earth. If you dig too much, you just dig perhaps a grave for yourself.
Yeah. Good point. And by the way, that's very interesting what you just mentioned. Imagine how freeing it would be to be the same kind of person when you're with your parents, family, children, strangers, coworkers. And how often does that happen? That doesn't happen very often because we a lot of times feel we need to act a certain way or be a certain way in front of these various audiences. Well, again, the more authentic you are, there wouldn't be that need to operate in that way. So a lot of it has to do with mindset. So, to answer your question as briefly as I can, in the book, Who Are You? Really, the search for authenticity. So, let me just say it's a fairly quick read. However, if you really want to take each of those chapters and work through the exercises to do exactly what you're asking, it'll take a little while. So someone could read through it pretty quickly and maybe, oh, hey, that sounds pretty good. And then they put it down. And that's part of the problem sometimes with coaching is that, hey, this sounds good on this day. But, but then everybody forgets everything during the week or life happens and working on ourselves gets pushed aside until the following week. And then, oh, hey, I feel so good about it. So, uh, what the book allows people to do is to take their time really going through that process of examining who they are. And as you had said, you're always going to be changing. We're evolving and changing all the time, but it's about being aware of that. And it's about having that reflective nature and mindset to be able to, first of all, be grateful and have gratitude and do that on a daily basis, but also examine what your strengths, accomplishments, and talents are, what defines you, what are the things that bring you joy, bring a smile to your face, but also what are the things that you really do not like. And then we can begin to address bringing about change to those areas. And that's what we're trying to do is to find some sort of, if you're able to really define what your core values are, you can begin to address those things that you feel aren't authentic. And from there, have a sense of peace and contentment moving forward.
Okay. Ray, let's look at it in a much more, simple manner. Because you can do it because you have worked with children, every grade, till K-12, and both private and public. And then you have also been in the corporate environment. You are an award-winning trainer. So you can, look at both the aspects very, very well. How does a person begin? What is the first step? What is it that you tell your client? What is it that you guide people when they come to you, when they themselves don't know whether they are authentic or not? Where if they are really, firstly is obviously they should have that desire to find their authentic self. So how do you take that first step? What do you do in terms of the first step? Let's try and decode this as a step by step method so that it becomes simple for people, for audience to take that journey to find themselves in the most authentic true form.
So it's going to be, it might be a little different for young people versus adults. So I'll start with young people for a moment. Many young people haven't begun to even think of that, right? And a lot of the answers I'll get too is they'll say, "Well, I don't really want to commit to an answer because what I'll start with is, so who are you?" Right? And then they'll say, "Well, wait a minute. I'm hesitant." Sometimes they'll say, "I'm human." and it's perfectly valid. But what they will, they're sometimes hesitant because they'll say, well, wait a minute, if I have an experience tomorrow or on Saturday, I'm going to change. Well, you're absolutely right. It doesn't mean that if you're reflecting on who you are, it doesn't mean that you're not going to change. It's really planting that seed of being aware of how your experiences really do impact you, and that it can change and it can grow. So that's what we really start with. And a lot of times I'll also, uh, I mentioned it earlier, I'll add that they're actually in a very powerful position, because when it comes time for a job interview, or they're filling out a college application or a scholarship application, even doing their essays for university, it's all about accessing who they are. And so all of a sudden they're in a different mindset for that. And it's going to serve them through their adult years. Now, when you're an adult, though, so I've had a lot of times adults will actually just kind of freeze, and they'll tear up and they'll say, I've been trying to figure this out for my entire life. And that goes to your question earlier. So in the book, what I have to help people really begin being able to take that journey, there are assessments that you can take on who you are, personality assessments. I'm not saying that that's going to be a true reflection, but it gives you something to look at. You might agree with it, you may not agree with it. You may want to improve something. You may want to say, hey, I want to be stronger in this area, or I want to be more extroverted versus introverted. But the personality assessments give you a chance to, a place to start if you're unsure. The other thing to think about too is I give a link to, I think it's a strengths assessment, and that allows you, what are your strengths when it comes to putting yourself out there in the workforce. What are those strengths there? So that helps, again, people to have something to start from. But like with the young people, one of the first things, who are you? And let that sink in. And all too often, again, it's because we're human, it's because of the way we've been conditioned. When somebody asks a question like that that's pretty deep, our immediate thought is, how does this person want me to answer it? Instead of, how would I truly answer it? And so it's one of those things where we put it out there, but it's a question that has to be asked multiple times, because it's such a heavy question and it can be answered in so many different ways. But then to break that down even more, it's very similar to what I was saying earlier. What do you think defines you? What are your passions? What are things that you really enjoy? What are things that you don't enjoy? Because let's face it, as we get older, it becomes more and more difficult to continue doing things that don't bring us any joy or that we feel is a waste of time. So, what is that? And how can we bring about change that so it's more authentic to you? And then also, this may sound kind of silly, but exploring the other parts of who we are, your creative side. A lot of times we reach a certain age and we've forgotten how to be a kid again. We've forgotten how to let go and be loose. Um, the intellectual side, embracing that. Sometimes we're surrounded by people who don't share that same intellectual curiosity for things. So you have people who aren't being as authentic because they have no one to communicate with. So we have our creative side, our intellectual side, our emotional side, and our spiritual side. So it's really, again, if we are able to talk about a place to start, it starts with, who are you? And being able to kind of reflect on that question, which is not going to be an overnight answer. It may take some time to help further that along. Look at personality assessments. If you're looking at a career, or you want to uh, reflect on your strengths in terms of where you work, there's the Clifton Strengths Assessment that works very, very well. Those are the places to start. But it's a process. And look, the book is a primer. It's a place to start, because a lot of times when people go into coaching, let's just say they're going because they want to be a more effective leader. Let's say they want to go in because they are looking to maybe they want to seek out a health coach, change their diet, they want to exercise. But what we end up finding out is the block to get from A to B is not so much that you're an ineffective leader or don't really know how to lead, or you don't know which foods to eat, or part of it has to do with, do you know who you are? What is that block that's preventing you? In a leadership situation, a lot of times it could be because the ego gets in the way, right? And or you feel that you are not strong enough, or maybe made for that position, and so everybody else, even might be unconsciously, is kind of threatening, and so that impacts your ability to be an effective leader. So you're not going to discover that until you're able to peel back the layers to know who you are. And so in terms of the book, it may take a while for people to get through that. However, it's a great primer before seeking a coach so that you're in that proper mindset to begin that journey.
Right, right, right. Where do people get this book from? Is there a Are there places beyond Amazon? I'm sure it's also on Amazon.
Correct. It's on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback, but they can also go to authenticembassy.com.
Okay, that's your website.
Correct.
Right,
Correct.
right. Now, Ray, let's look at the young people. Today, it's a online world. And even if one wants to be themselves because of the upbringing they have, the parenting they have, but there is so much of peer pressure, and there is the pressure from the social media. Early morning you wake up, and you wake up with TikTok or other form of social media. How do they deal with this sort of stuff? Because it's going to stay as long as it is, and then there'll be something else. So, amidst all these things, the conditioning that our children are having at this point in time growing up, how do you tell them, or their parents, or anybody else who is listening or watching to this particular show, is that how do they tell the children of today to be their authentic self? Because if they lose that part, then you will have to peel many layers later on when they have grown up beyond a certain age.
So, and it I may sound redundant, but it's really fascinating by taking that question, who are you, and having them begin thinking about that. Uh, and then also it's celebrating who they are, celebrating who that individual is. Look, a lot of times, and this happens with adults too, but especially when you're younger, because of, as you had mentioned, we have the peer pressure, you have so many influences, uh, and then now we have social media. So there's always this sense of, I'm not good enough, or how can I compete with that other person, or this person seems to be so much more talented than I am. And so, in addition to that, who are you component, it's really about looking at that person's skills, that person's accomplishments, that person's talents, which again, unfortunately, unless you happen to already be an athlete where where perhaps you've competed, and maybe you've won a couple of awards, or you've been on a winning team. A lot of times there are some people who aren't doing after school activities. There are some people who are helping out the family because so they can't do much at school, or they might be online. And so they really haven't reflected or taken inventory about these things. And not only that, there are some things for people that come so natural that they don't look at it as an accomplishment. And so when they get ready to fill out an application, or they're talking in an interview, we've done this as adults ourselves. we're not necessarily representing ourselves as well as we should because we don't look at it as an accomplishment, or we don't look at something as important because it comes so naturally to us. And so it's really about uh, positioning a young person in that way to look at, hey, wait a minute, you bring so much to the table. And so when you're also understanding that when you happen to be in social situations, you're not the only person feeling awkward. That's a game changer right there. Other people may tend to look cool, calm, and collected, but they're going through the same thing that you are. So by positioning that mindset in that way, you begin to look at social media a little bit differently. You begin to look at the influences and the talk from others in a different way. By the way, this is not overnight. And this is really about continuing the conversation, though. It can't be something that, oh, I read it and then I'm completely different. It doesn't matter what age you are, but really hitting home that by being able to take inventory in who you are and celebrating and embracing those accomplishments, those talents, and those skills, to me, that's a game changer. And it's a great way to be able to uh, fight back against the more negative influences.
Right, right. Okay. So let's also tell people who are, maybe thinking, rethinking about authenticity and all, is the benefits that they can derive out of it, both from in terms of personal relationships as well as even in terms of their work life. Maybe that will make them much more, convinced that this is something that they look at much more closely.
Sure. Well, let's go with leadership first. I always talk about living, loving, and leading profoundly from accessing your most authentic self. So we'll start with leading for a moment. And leading doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a supervisor or a manager, but it's really about being an example for others in terms of how you're being able to keep a level head, or when you're working with your coworkers, it's not so much a competition as it's being able to serve as an example and be able to work more comfortably with those around you. Again, as I mentioned earlier, some leaders uh, they're in a position, they're in a leadership position, maybe because they know a lot about that job or the company, wherever they may be, but they're not exactly a leader because they're not sure really how to empower and how to support. And sometimes that comes from not feeling that they really deserve that or belong in that position. Well, wait a minute, maybe they do, but the more authentic we can be, the easier it is to lead, or the easier it is to brand, or the easier it is to support other people. Even if that means that they move on to another position, they'll remember how you made them feel. When
Right.
it comes to loving, when it comes to relationships, again, the more authentic we can be, there's no, uh, in relationships, it's difficult because whether it's platonic or romantic, we want people to like us right away. We want to, we get this sense of we want to appear a certain way for them. So maybe we should act a certain way. I had one client who became aware that every time she was around certain people, she would transform herself to even talking like the other person. And she realized that, hey, wait a minute, I wasn't being myself. I felt I had to do that in order to make that connection. And so it's, you know, what's on the other side of this is peace, contentment, meaningful relationships. You and I were talking earlier about conversation. There was a study done a couple years ago, and the result of the study, 91% of those that were surveyed find conversations boring. What? So the revelation there is that people aren't really having meaningful conversations anymore. And so are they being as authentic to themselves as well as those that they're around in order to have those meaningful conversations? Because that exchange really has to do with, hey, share with me something special that you did. Oh, that's wonderful. And being happy for that person, and then being able to have that, oh, what are you doing? We just don't see that anymore. And after COVID, people being isolated for so long, we're also seeing that people have sort of forgotten how to interact. And we see this, on the streets. We see this at sporting events. We see this in the workforce. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, in order to really have those meaningful relationships, or in order to truly thrive in the workforce, in order to be authentic in our lives, we need to be authentic with ourselves, which means being comfortable even when no one's around. It means having, and this will come a little bit later, but recognizing or articulating what your purpose is, because that's another thing that people will say, well, what am I supposed to do? I want to do X, Y, and Z. But again, before we can jump to that, we really have to peel back the layers to discover who we are. And so by doing that, suddenly now things are going to change. You get up and there's not this meandering as if it's a weekend. You get up and there's purpose in what you do. And you're comfortable doing things on your own for yourself. And so what ends up happening is, instead of being drawn to others, which is going to be natural anyway, but instead of that always being the inclination, you're going to have people drawn to you because of how you show up. And I want to just add one last thing. The other benefit of that is staying balanced. We all deal with things, there are wonderful, exciting things that happen, like being on your show. There are these wonderful, exciting things that happen where everybody gets excited, but then, if something happens, all of a sudden they're devastated, or there might be something that's negative that happens, and it's so hard to bring themselves back up. So I would argue, and what I've worked with people on, is maintaining that balance. And the more that you know yourself, that's going to be a benefit of that. And I've seen that happen. My wife, for example. So I've been married for almost 20 years. And one of the most exciting things was a couple of years ago. She was dealing with something, and the others around her were reacting, but she responded as opposed to reacting. And it was incredible to watch her maintain that balance. So it, I had to use a personal example, just because we try to, everything that I share, we're already living. And I didn't have to really say much. I was just as a bystander watching her, and I was just amazed at how that worked. And for her to be able to return to center was just amazing. So, I mean, it's if you know who you are, it's a game changer.
Right, it's a game changer. Now let's look at how is the present situation is that there is so much of superficial talk everywhere.
Mhm.
Why do we do superficial talk? Second thing is that even if we try to be our authentic self, then there is the industry, there is the market, which keeps on pushing things to us. There is always that sales angle, sell as much as possible. Our minds, our bodies, they are all almost like guinea pigs for the market in several
Mhm.
cases. How do you the same person who wants authenticity at home goes to the office and sells stuff that he will never like to do or use at home? Then it is like, that you want something for yourself, but you are creating a world which is very toxic. So
Yeah.
how do you balance that part? How do you know? Because companies all the time keep on talking about branding, is pushing products, and those products which are not good for humanity, is that good branding? You may have, there are so many things, so many views in terms of job creation, livelihood, and all that stuff going on, but that's not what we are discussing right now. Right now we are talking about humans, their authentic self. So how do you see those things, several things, contradicting things at the same time, but amidst all these things we need to find ourselves, our authentic self. How did you manage to do, Ray?
So a lot to unpack there. One of the most difficult things for us when we're adults is when all of a sudden you become aware of what we've just been talking about. The immediate response is, well, I have kids, I have a job, I can't just up and leave. I have a house, I have responsibilities. And so we need to take that into consideration. So, first, you mentioned about being authentic in terms of what you're selling or your company. Let me just offer something else for just a moment. If you're starting, uh, a lot of times we're trying to figure out what should be our logo, what should be our branding, our mission statement. If you've ever been in a company situation where you're coming up with a new mission statement, it may have been difficult, and the reason why it's difficult is because there's no connection and may not be authentic to you. But if you're starting out, one of the easiest ways is to be as authentic as possible. You mentioned about people in those situations where they're selling things that really are the antithesis of what we're talking about. That's something that they have to work through. A lot of times there are so many people I've worked with who, when they were coming up in the world, they ended up falling into something that came naturally to them. And we're in this rush. We want to be 13, we want to be 16, 18, 20. We're in this rush to grow up. But then once we've grown up, we realize the world is a little bit different than what we thought originally. And the thing is what ends up happening, though, is in that rush to grow up, there are those things that come naturally to us, or we have an opportunity to make some money without realizing that if we followed our passion, that was going to sustain us for the rest of our lives. But we get into something where we can jumpstart our lives. Hey, I can get a new car, I can get a home, I can do I can. Now 10, 15, 20 years later, there's, on paper it looks perfect, but there's a disconnect. And the reason, very often as we begin to unpack these, happens to be because we lost ourselves somewhere in the process. Uh, so it would, there's really no easy answer to say, well, if these people are doing, they may not be aware of that. And priorities may be, we have to, at some point, I hate to say it, but some people have to settle. They have to make that decision. What's going to be more important? What's going to be a priority? And by the way, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, is because people in coaching, again, life seems to somehow get in the way. And then rather than focusing or working on ourselves, we're always pushing that aside, pushing that aside, pushing that aside. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to put something together that people could kind of work through to jumpstart that at some point, so that if they wanted coaching, they'd be in the right mindset and be more, know what they would want to pursue a little bit further to change. As far as myself, my wife and I transitioned from the East Coast of the United States to the West Coast about 5 years ago. And we did that because what we recognized, a part of it was family. We came out for family. But the other part, though, that really kind of cemented the decision was that we felt that even though we had good careers, we felt that we were spinning our wheels and not getting a return on our investment. So we wanted to be, do, have, and give more. And so what we did was in making that decision to make that transition, we said, all right, look, we need to commit ourselves to being surrounded by remarkable people. We need to make sure that we find people, or whatever we do for work, however we live our lives once we move out there, we want to make sure to be very intentional about it. So a lot of it had to do with being very mindful about what we were doing, and making sure that we were very open as we uh, as we progressed through each step of that transition. And so, uh, was I authentic before? I think so, but not to the extent that I feel both, even my wife and I, are authentic today.
Right, right, Ray. Now, let's look at this. Is the, peeling their layers? Is it for everybody? Because if again I started with Dr. Jekyll, I have read this book, not read the story, know a bit about, but I've never read this book in full. But I plan to do it. It has not happened as yet. But if I understand, uh, Dr. Jekyll was a good man, and to save him, save the world, or save everybody, or perhaps whatever it is, he committed suicide. So that was the only way. If I guess it is right. This is what I could gather from whatever I read on the internet. Now, if that is right, then that's a very difficult situation, because he knew about himself, knowing about people, because people are suffering about from imposter syndrome. They know who they are. If they come to know more about themselves, even there is a saying goes that behind every big fortune there is a crime. So many people do so many things while they are getting up, rise in their careers, in their lives, do so many things. Is it that people who start looking back at themselves in the way authenticity we are talking about, is it good for them, or it can be not so good, as it
Yeah.
happened in the case of Dr. Jekyll? How do we look at that? Does everybody had the wherewithal to look themselves in the mirror the way they are, or the way they have traversed the path in their life?
Yeah. Look, that it can be a very painful uh, process. Yeah, it's like that question: would you date yourself, or would you want to be a friend with yourself, right? And immediately we all go. There's that hesitancy at first, right? Because we know all those dark areas. Look, that's why when you begin asking yourself, who are you? That's why it is very important that, uh, and again, understand that the book is only a primer. It's only the beginning, but it's at that point, if you cannot see any light when you're doing that, then I would strongly encourage to go through that process with a friend, or a peer, family member, or coach, because we need to also focus on the positives. We need to focus on those. Like, I come back to the strengths, the accomplishments, the talents, because again, there are some people who are going to go straight to the negative and just check off all those boxes. Well, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this. Whoa, 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 whoa. It and first of all, it's not what there's a great quote, and I hope I get it properly. It's by someone who's anonymous, but it reads something to the effect of, "It's not who you are that's holding you back. It's who you think you're not." So the, it's okay for us to acknowledge those areas that we want to work on. And it's only human to look at those and say, hey, I'm an awful this, I'm an awful that. But it's really and look, the other part too, the reason why those things resonate so much, think about our memories, right? Uh, if we've had an argument with somebody and it was a negative experience, those things resonate more strongly with us. And that's what we remember even more than some of the good times. So it's really about retraining the brain to focus on, and that's where the gratitude comes in, to focus on those more positive things. And that has to be understood if you're going to begin peeling back those layers. But as in, now this is coaching, not counseling, but as in counseling, it's really about facing the truth. And we need to do the same thing in coaching. And if you really want to begin to transform, you need to
Right.
start by being honest with yourself.
Being honest with yourself. Be that as it may, Ray, the time those people who actually want to, look at themselves to find themselves in the true way they are, how can they connect with you so that organizations, individuals, so that they can take your help and get the best out of your advice.
Oh, first of all, if anybody's had any questions, they're more than welcome to reach out to authenticembassy.com. Please feel free to do that at any time. But there are also, there's, I believe it's Angie's List, there's Thumbtack, where you can use those apps to look for coaches in your area. There's an app called Joy, where you can look for, there's also Numi. So if people are looking for that, uh, those are some of the more Thumbtack and Angie cater to all sorts of different, whatever you're looking for. But Numi and Joy are specific to the coaching environment or coaching space.
Right, right, Ray. It's been a great conversation with you, Ray, and it's a nice thing that if people can actually know about their true self and live a full life, a good life. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, AJ. And that is I mean, that's the flip side of it is contentment, peace, happiness. Uh, the conversation's important, and it'd be nice if we could be able to have those exchanges more often with each other. I don't think we're having it as much as we need to.
Right. Then that makes me, think of one more question, Ray, is that which I just forgot, and then I was thinking of closing in. That's not generally the way I close my show, but then I exactly remembered on time. Is that talking of authenticity, authentic self? Darwin talks about the evolution of species. Now, with so much of untruth, superficiality, and everything, do you think that we as human species who are much more connected to ourselves, we have evolved, and this is the way it's going to be, and there is nothing called authentic self that we need to find for ourselves? How do you see this aspect, and that it is going to be a permanent thing? How do you look at that? What that and is it right, is it wrong? I also don't want it to be right, but just wanted to throw this question to you and understand your thought. That's my last question.
Sure. I think the pendulum is going to swing back. But, and again, that was something that you and I had kind of touched on a little earlier. Uh, you had mentioned in your high energy podcast, you had talked about podcasts and how popular they're becoming, and especially the ones that are focused on bringing about value. We have our entertainment podcasts, but then the ones of value. Well, the reason why they're so valuable, and I would argue even the entertainment ones do this, but the reason why they're so valuable uh, is because we get to watch and listen to people having these civil discussions. and it's about everything. So there's no topic that's left untouched. And I think what's happening and what we're seeing is that, as I mentioned earlier, with 91% finding conversations to be boring, and that wasn't introverts. I mean, that was across the board that was surveyed. Uh, I think we've forgotten how to have conversations. And a lot of times, even with people that we've known for years, we rely on this sort of generic, superficial, top layer kind of conversation. They're not meaningful anymore. Uh, and so we're being able to see this through the podcast. And I think that's why they're so popular. And I think we'll see that pendulum swing back, especially now that we're coming out of the pandemic, because I think people are craving that. I've even seen, which is really wonderful. I've even seen some of my younger students are introverts, and even they, while while they may not while they may have may not always want to be in the public eye, they want to at least be able to have the choice to go out or the choice to participate, or whereas before they didn't have that. So I think there's that, um, as we are all human, as part of that human experience, we do crave to be more connected. And I think we're going to see that. Now, I don't know how fast that pendulum will swing, but I think we'll see that. And real quick, I just want to also add, even though some of those other podcasts that are more entertaining, um, influencers, celebrities, what was very interesting was during the COVID years, their shows, it was very interesting to listen to them really, um, to use the buzzword, be authentic. It was really wonderful to watch them be open and honest about mental health, about anxiety. And it was what was neat was probably for the first time. I mean everybody does the interview, for the movies, and they're on the shows. But I think this was one of the few times where they were laid bare, and it was such an amazing thing to watch, because I think people need to see that as well as hear that, because they at that point were being their most authentic selves, and I, we just don't see that enough.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's such a positive way of looking at things, and I feel much more positive about this whole aspect. And I would like to leave the Darwinian theory of evolution, at least for the time being, a bit backwards in terms of being our authentic self. On this positive note, with the, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Library. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much indeed.
AJ, thank you so much. I appreciate being on your show. Thank you. Be well.